Hey, today we're going to be reviewing a few viewer-submitted weapons and what makes them good or bad, alongside how to use them and potential improvements to them. These first 3 episodes of Season 2 will be redoing episodes 10 and 12 of the original run of Weapon Review, but after that, it's all new. If you want to submit a weapon for review, the link is in the description. No point in wasting any more time, let's just get right into it. First up is what I call the Great Axe Plus. Its main strength is that it's primarily a Great Axe, which happens to be the highest damage non-phantom guarded melee weapon in the game. Additionally, it's on the longest handle in the game, so you can seriously outreach a lot of enemies. One other thing I want to touch upon is that if you use Air Slash with a Great Axe, and you hit the orb with the right part of the blade, you can deal absolutely insane damage, without even buffing yourself. To be specific, 2.04 damage, or 6.12 hearts, from a single unbuffed Air Slash. The Great Axe Plus has some weaknesses, however. Firstly, while the Wakizashis and decorative blades do add some to overall durability, they will almost never get used, as your best choice in any combat encounter with this thing is the Great Axe itself. Additionally, the extra weight added by these blades, if you're using Valiant or Gold, can significantly slow down your movement and climbing speeds. This brings me to my suggested improvements. Simply put, if you just remove the decorative blades and Wakizashis, the weapon will be objectively better in most combat encounters. If you really want to keep them, then make them out of mithril so they don't weigh you down as much. Besides that, this weapon is already pretty good, so you'll probably be fine with whatever permutation of it you choose. Lastly, how do you use the Great Axe Plus? Well, like most long-handled weapons in this game, just stay out of range of the enemy you're hitting and smack them with the Great Axe. Just like the polearms discussed in the last episode, this thing can totally shut down Turabatas with the right movement. Also, just like I mentioned earlier, combining Air Slash with a Great Axe provides the highest non-phantom guarded damage obtainable with a melee weapon. Overall, the Great Axe Plus is one of the strongest non-phantom guarded weapons in the game, and it is useful in basically every melee encounter. It's also just generally fun to use, so it's got that going for it. Thanks for the submission. Up next is the Grimdachi. Realistically, this is basically the best weapon in the game. If you take everything good I said about the Great Axe Plus, turn it up to 11, and add steroids, you get the Grimdachi. Insane range, even more insane damage, and a combo with Ground Slam that dominates in PvP. So then, what are its weaknesses? Unfortunately, it has very few. Its only true weakness is the Phantom Guard itself. Simply put, you don't use this thing in PvE. Generally, PvE encounters are closer to endurance tests than they are to duels, so if you end up in the wrong scenario, you can get screwed over by the self-damage. Besides that, the biggest thing I can say against it is that the daggers and Wakizashis are somewhat unnecessary, but even that's a stretch. As for improvements, the only thing I can really recommend is to remove the Wakizashi and the dagger from one side, because you're almost never using that side of the weapon, so it could reduce weight. Additionally, make everything besides the main blade made out of mithril. Weight could become a problem with the wrong setup, so you want to reduce it as much as you can for the best result. Lastly, how do you use a Grimdachi? Well, there are 3 main things you need to remember while using one. 1. Do not let your opponent get close enough that you can't hit them with the Great Sword. 2. Keep your weapon charged up as much as possible, specifically using Charged Strike, because the less you have to hit your enemy, the less self-damage you take. 3. Abuse Ground Slam. The insane reach on the Grimdachi, combined with the insane cripple and decent damage provided by Ground Slam, makes for one of the most potent PvP combos in the entire game, as you can slow your enemy and then just wail on them without them being able to do a whole lot about it. As I said earlier, this is probably the best weapon in the game. There's not much else I can say about it besides that. Regardless, thanks for the submission. Third is the Anubis. Theoretically speaking, this thing has the highest DPS obtainable in the game. If you have a general idea of how much damage each weapon does, you might be confused as to why I chose a showtail blade over something that normally does more damage, like a short sword or rapier. Well, that's because when you put a showtail on a phantom guard, it does nearly double the damage of the other two. I have no idea why, but for some reason, the showtail does 0.6 while the other two deal 0.35. The Anubis does have some glaring weaknesses, though. Firstly, it has mediocre range when compared to most of the other weapons that try to go for high damage. Secondly, to obtain the max DPS, you basically need a stationary target, which you will never get in PvP, and you shouldn't be using a phantom guarded weapon in PvE anyway. Lastly, when using the optimal fighting style, there's a serious chance that your weapons will get caught on each other, which can seriously screw you over. So, what is the optimal fighting style? Well, if you dual wield Anubises, then you can swing them in an alternating back and forth motion, where they are at opposite rotation the whole time. This decreases the chances of your weapons getting caught on each other, but it's not perfect. If you can get into a good rhythm though, the damage output is absurd. Lastly, how would I improve the Anubis? Well, short of changing the entire premise of the weapon, I basically can't. The reason you would use showtail blades instead of something higher damage like a greatsword or thick greatsword is because those give you absolutely horrible handling when you have one on each side of the weapon. Unless there's something I'm not aware of, the Anubis is as optimized as I can get it. I really want to love the Anubis, but given its significant problems, along with the extremely specific fighting style needed to even get the insane DPS it can give you, I just can't. I'd say thanks for the submission, but this is actually one that I made for episode 12 of the original run of Weapon Review, so let's just move on to the next weapon. Remember what I just said about having a greatsword on both ends of a handle being extremely unwieldy? Well, that's the entire concept of the helicopter blade. So, what exactly are its strengths? The main one is just that it has a phantom guarded greatsword on it, with a medium handle for extra reach. There's probably some way to use it for insane DPS, but I haven't found it. As for weaknesses, this is literally a joke weapon. It has bad handling and moderate range, and can be insanely heavy due to 2 greatswords. If you use this, don't expect it to perform particularly well unless you're using it like a regular sword, and even then it's heavier, more expensive, and less wieldy than one. If you don't want to use it like a regular sword, however, how do you use it? Well, the general technique is to hold it above your head and spin it, like the blade of a helicopter. Additionally, this has an interesting interaction with air slash, where if you get everything positioned correctly, you can pump out air slashes at an insane rate, but due to how you're swinging the blade, they won't be particularly powerful. For potential improvements, it really just depends on what you want out of it. If you want a practical weapon, then these are probably closer to what you're looking for. If you want to maximize DPS, then go make an Anubis or something. And if you want to maximize range, replacing the greatswords with longswords is the way to go. Unfortunately, I don't think you can put 2 phantom guards on the long wooden handle, so you can't do any of the insanity possible with that. I absolutely love this thing. It's probably the most useful joke weapon I've ever seen, and it can definitely be fun to use. Again, I'd say thanks for the submission, but this is actually one that I made for episode 12 of the original run of Weapon Review, so let's just move on to the next weapon. Lastly is the slingshot. I know I said in the episode this was originally in that Weapon Review only discusses weapons in a melee context, but that's just not true anymore. So, what can the slingshot do? Well, if you want insane early game damage, this is literally the best in the game. Not because of any skill combo or buff stacks, but because you can shoot lit dynamite at people. Dynamite does 4.00 damage, or 16 hearts of damage. Follow that up with something faster like a Terabata tier, and you've got what I call the poor man's holy arrow combo. I cannot overstate how powerful this can be at early levels. So then, what are the slingshot's weaknesses? Well, if you're using explosives, then self-damage at closer ranges is really the only one. If If you're using anything else, then I'd say the biggest weakness is the difficulty to use, but it might just be that I'm bad with it. I basically already mentioned what I think the best way to use the slingshot is, but there are a few more interesting uses, so let's go over those. You can shoot a telepotion at someone to send them back to spawn. You can combine stuff like Holy Arrow multi-shot and a Wakizashi kunai for pretty damn high damage. You can shoot rocks at Turabatas to farm archery XP. You can even launch healing pods at your teammates for fast healing. Generally, there are a decent number of uses for a slingshot, but those are the few that I really like. As for potential improvements, there literally aren't any. 100% of the slingshot's power comes from the ammunition, and we've already been over the best combos for those. Overall, I think the slingshot is really good. It's no Grimdachi, but it's way easier to obtain than Holy Arrow or a Phantom Guard. Thanks for the submission, and sorry it took me so long to actually review it. Well, there you go. All 5 weapons done for this video. Thank you to everyone who submitted a weapon already. I'm really looking forward to getting to the new submissions in a couple of episodes. Also, if you have a weapon you want me to review in one of those future episodes, the link to submit that is in the description. But, with all that said, I'll see you around.